It took Ultravox 5 years since signing with a major label to have their first big hit. It came at a time when you wouldn't expect it. They lost a key member and their recording contract, and they were written off by many in the press as simply being imitators of the very artists that they actually inspired. Ultravox's iconic single is famously remembered not only for not reaching number 1, but for being held off the top spot by a novelty song that will leave you scratching your head. This unusual chart battle between the sublime synth-pop ballad and a lighthearted novelty track remains a striking moment in music history. Before we get started, be sure to hit the bell notification icon and put all notifications on. I hear from a lot of my subscribers that they don't even get notifications when I post my videos. I would greatly appreciate if you guys did that. In addition to, of course, watching my videos and sharing my content. The group's origins dated back to the early 70s and involved a Canadian named Warren Cann, who spent his formative years playing in local Vancouver bands like Five Man Cargo. Cann and a friend named Al Harrow flew to England hoping to get involved in the music scene in 1973. The charts were being dominated by Slade and Gary Glitter, but Harrow went back to Canada as he was disillusioned with the music scene. But Cann opted to stay and answered an ad in a music weekly. And that's where he met vocalist John Foxx, resulting in Ultravox being formed in April of 1974. The group's lineup included bassist Chris Cross and Billy Currie on synthesizers, piano, and violin. The group spent long hours rehearsing and playing the occasional club gig to ward off starvation. All while this was going on, punk rock began taking over the nation. The group still hadn't chosen a proper name by this point in time, ultimately just going with Ultravox. Their first album, co-produced by Brian Eno, which was said to have been halfway between punk and glam, resulted in some critics slamming the album for being too self-indulgent and pretentious. Cann admitted that the band wasn't comfortable in a 24-track recording studio, and they were hoping that Eno would have taught them more, but he really didn't. The members also butted heads with frontman John Foxx, who according to the band was acting like a prima donna with a hot temper. Cann told LA Weekly how Foxx was keeping a distance between him and his bandmates, having contempt for them, adding some of his lyrics were real cringers, and you couldn't say anything or he'd get hung up and sulk for a week. All while this was happening, the band was dropped by Island Records by December of '78 due to disappointing sales of their third record, Systems of Romance, which came out 3 months prior. Ultravox had previously feuded with the label and their inability to promote the album in the States. Cann told LA Weekly how their reggae-loving head of their label occasionally dropped into the office to create chaos and then disappeared to Jamaica for 6 months at a time. He added, he played us cassettes of American radio saying, "Listen, this is what you're up against. I'm having a hard time with Robert Palmer and Bob Marley. I really can't see you guys getting in on this sort of thing." Despite doubts from their label, Gary Newman started scoring hit after hit, even citing Ultravox as inspiring him. Funny enough, when Ultravox was promoting Vienna in the American press years later, many in the American media made note at how at first glance it seemed like Ultravox were the ones ripping Gary Newman off. With no label and tensions rising in the band, they did something pretty ballsy. They figured that the only way they were going to make inroads in America and Canada was to organize their own tour. While most bands would have lost money on such a proposition, Ultravox ended up selling out most dates, turning a profit. The Vancouver Sun wrote in 1980, Ultravox came within a broom's closet full of fans selling out the 1,100 capacity Commodore. Lay it to faith, the city has learned what sounds right in new wave no matter how neglected. Despite coming off a successful North American tour, the band opted to part ways with Foxx, a risky move considering he was really the face of the group. It wasn't just personality differences, but Foxx's desire to take the band in a minimalistic direction. Foxx went on to pursue a solo career, but unfinished music soon became a sort of custody battle, as 2 tracks he released, including He's a Liquid and Touch and Go, appeared on his first solo record, 1980's Metamatic, and they are credited entirely to himself. Of course, his bandmates disputed this, and at the time the publishing company had to freeze money until the dispute was solved. Ultravox ended up issuing their own version of Touch and Go, albeit a slower version, and Foxx isn't credited on the song. Enter Midge Ure, a guy who basically refused to play by the rules and unexpectedly changed the sound of the 80s. Born James Ure in Scotland, he adopted the name Midge, and as a lot of people say, life is all about timing. He kept showing up in the right place at the right time. He grew up in a working-class family in Campbellslang, on the outskirts of Glasgow, living in a humble one-bedroom flat with his siblings and parents for the first decade of his life. It was after school he trained as an engineer. Yeah, a real one, not like how Katy Perry calls herself an astronaut. He soon got into the local music scene. He started out in the 70s with Slick, a band that scored a UK #1 hit with Forever and Ever. Fun fact, he actually turned down an offer to be the lead singer of Sex Pistols. Yep, you heard that right. He thought Malcolm McLaren was a bit off his rocker. Later, he regretted that decision, walking back his words on the manager. He later ended up joining the group Rich Kids with ex-Sex Pistols bassist Glenn Matlock, and then formed the group Visage, where he cranked out the hit The Haunting Fade to Grey, which was a top 10 hit in the UK, and it did well elsewhere in Europe. Also part of the group was Ultravox's Billy Currie. And let's not forget, in 1978, he even pinch hit for Thin Lizzy's American tour when Gary Moore bailed, and he received a co-writing credit on Get Out of Here from their Black Rose album, and a few other recordings on the remix compilation album The Continuing Saga of the Aging Orphans.
Things ain't working out yet. We'd laugh and joke and smoke.
He collaborated with Phil Lynott on solo stuff like Yellow Pearl, which ended up as a theme song for Top of the Pops for most of the 80s. But the real plot twist, Ultravox. The band was basically dead after John Foxx left. Ure had long been a fan and had previously played with Currie. It was following the demise of Rich Kids that Midge remarked that he was a little hesitant to join another band, but he couldn't give up Currie's invitation to join the group. So in 1979, Midge became the singer, songwriter, guitarist, and synth guy all at once. The classic Ultravox lineup was soon born: Currie on keys and violin, Warren Cann on drums, Criss Cross on bass, and Midge fronting the group. Midge recalled in his book, "What we were doing was radical and new. Synthesizers, drum machines, and electric guitar mixed together. Synth bass with regular drums playing on top of it. The electronic and the organic. It had never been done before. Our sound was massive. This weird crossover between Kraftwerk and the guitars, bass, and drums that belonged to every rock band in the world." The group began working on their 4th record, Vienna. Cann told LA Weekly how the record was a drastic departure for the band, admitting, "In the past, we were perhaps a bit too eclectic because you can listen to some of the albums and each track sounds like a different band. That's all right, but it makes for extremely hard work to listen to. It was a conscious decision to make Vienna more coherent." The album was also a more collaborative effort than their previous works. But the recording sessions proved to be difficult still. The first tracks written were Astrodyne, Mr. X, and New Europeans. Following a concert in London in February of 1980, Chrysalis Records showed interest in the band and gave them studio record time to record some demos. The band opted to put all their energy into the song Sleepwalk, and liking what they heard, they were offered a contract by Chrysalis. The band soon signed with the label, who paid off the small debt that they still owed to Island. For Currie, with a new frontman, he wanted to utilize his classical musical training, telling The Guardian, "I said to the guys, I was keen to do something that sounded like the late 19th century Romantics. We were extremely arrogant back then and probably too prog rocky. We did do some fairly long tracks. Of course, we have to talk about the title track. Midge told The Guardian, first and foremost, we weren't trying to create a hit song, just an interesting piece of music. Ultravox had been dropped by their label, our management had disappeared, and we had to scrape around for money just to get into a rehearsal studio. It was cold and miserable, as all these studios are, with sticky carpets and a smell, and that's where we wrote Vienna."
Music is weaving.
The song carried the atmosphere of a melancholic Central European classic, largely due to Curie's background in classical music. The group were focused on creating tracks that felt like soundtracks to imaginary films. Currie recalled how he had been listening to German composer Max Reger, adding, "He tried too hard and deliberately overdid things," adding, "That was why I did a violin solo that was overly vibrato and romantic. Midge felt a little uncomfortable because he'd only just joined and thought we were being arty-farty. This means nothing to me," he said. And Connie Plank, our producer, replied, "Well, sing that then."
This means nothing to me.
Much of Ultravox's music at the time was built around evocative fragments or sound bites. The song Vienna itself was imagined as a romantic ode to a fictional woman. It tells the story of visiting a stunning city, meeting someone special, and believing that the connection will last only for reality to come into play and the relationship ends. As for why they chose Vienna as a backdrop, well, it was all thanks to Fleetwood Mac. Midge recalled in his book, "One night I was sitting having a conversation with my old manager, Jerry Hempstead, who would co-manage the Rich Kids, when his wife Brenda said to me, 'Midge, what you need to write is a song like that Vienna.' I looked blank and she went, 'You know, that Fleetwood Mac song.' I looked blank. 'No, it wasn't Vienna,' said Jerry. 'It was Rhiannon.' That was the night I went home with Vienna lodged in my brain."
She promised you heaven, will you ever win?
The city's atmosphere of decaying beauty made it feel like the perfect backdrop for a fleeting, passionate romance. In such surroundings, maybe as Ultravox saw it, it's easy to fall in love, but eventually you must return to your ordinary, boring life. Ultravox performed the song even before it was finished at some of their live shows. At one concert at the Electric Ballroom in Camden, Currie recalled, "The crowd thought we were onto something new. This was just the start of a new decade and people were receptive though. Obviously there was a few punks shouting at us, but when we heard the final mix, we didn't think we had a hit. It was just a track. Others seemed just as likely to chart, such as Mr. X." Released in July of 1980, Vienna's first single was Sleepwalk, which peaked at number 29 on the UK chart. The second single, Passing Strangers, peaked at number 57 on the same chart. But it was the third single, the title track, that finally broke through the rest of Europe. It spent 4 weeks at the number 2 spot in the UK. Number 1 at the time was Joe Dolce's novelty hit, Should That Be a Face?
It's a not so bad, it's a nicer place, shut up your face.
The title track did hit number 1 though in Ireland, Netherlands, and Belgium. In 2017, Midge declined an opportunity to meet Dolce, saying, "I've had 40 years of people talking about Joe Bloody Dolce, and I don't want to spend what I've got left talking about when I met him."
My mama, big accordion solo!
Despite never hitting number 1, Vienna did become the 6th best-selling single of 1981 in the UK. It won Single of the Year at the Brit Awards and was later voted the best song ever to stall at number 2 in a BBC Radio 2 poll. Interestingly, their label didn't even want to put the song out. They thought it was too long, slow, and they didn't think a violin solo lent itself to commercial viability. So why did Vienna connect so well? Well, it was weird, honestly. A synth-heavy, dramatic ballad with a violin solo, total anomaly for the charts. It was something that really nobody else was doing at the time, and we also have to talk about the music video. It was shot in both London as well as, well, of course, Vienna. It featured landmarks such as St. Stephen's Cathedral and the Centraic Cemetery where Beethoven and Schubert are buried. But the members were dirt poor as almost everything worn was from thrift stores. The only exception was a 300-pound Burberry raincoat. And here's a bonus. The grave shown in the video and on the single cover belongs to Karl Schweihhofer, whose family made pianos for the Austrian imperial court. That's some deep-cut Vienna trivia for you guys. Vienna went on to inspire the musicians who followed in Ultravox's footsteps. Even Duran Duran's John Taylor admitted that they'd listened to Vienna in the studio for inspiration. The success of Vienna followed the group, with the band recalling, "Everyone wanted us to write a track called Berlin or Paris next." The whole record was a showcase for their new sound, synths front and center, classical flourishes, and a distinctly European sense of style. Ultravox, along with bands like Spandau Ballet and Duran Duran, helped kick off the new romantic movement. The album Vienna peaked at number 3 on the UK charts and was a top 10 hit elsewhere in Europe, but in America it stalled at number 164. Between 1980 and 1986, Ultravox scored several more successful albums and numerous top 40 singles in the UK, including the previously mentioned Sleepwalk, All Stood Still, Hymn, and Dancing with Tears in My Eyes. They were huge in Europe, and while they never quite cracked America, they did manage a minor US hit with Reap the Wild Wind. Midge wasn't just a band guy though. In 1984, he co-wrote and produced Do They Know It's Christmas with Bob Geldof, pulling together the Band-Aid supergroup. The single sold almost 4 million copies in the UK alone. Midge and Geldof then organized Live Aid and Live 8, raising millions for anti-poverty efforts. He's also a solo artist with hits like If I Was and the album The Gift reaching number 2 in the UK. Ultravox's influence is everywhere. Vienna has popped up in TV shows like The Americans, 13 Reasons Why, American Crime Story, and even Doctor Who. The song reached charted in 1993 and still sounds fresh every time it hits the radio. And if you want to know what Midge is up to these days, he's still touring, still writing, and still living near Bath with his wife Sheridan Forbes and their 3 children. He's also a trustee for the Band-Aid Trust and an ambassador for Save the Children, proving you can be a synth-pop legend and a genuinely good human at the same time. So yeah guys, sometimes the weirdos win, and sometimes the song that means nothing ends up meaning everything. That does it for today's video guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.